The referendum in June was, to quote the leaflet sent to all households in the UK, a once-in-a-generation decision. There was nothing on the ballot and no suggestion from Parliament that there would have to be another referendum if the UK were to vote to leave. The then Prime Minister said during the campaign, and I quote, "I am absolutely clear a referendum is a referendum. It's a once-in-a-generation, once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and the result determines the outcome. You can't have neverendums, you have referendums." So, my Lords, the next bogus argument is that people did not know enough to make an informed decision. I personally don't see that approach and that argument as either particularly liberal or democratic. I do, my Lord, see it as somewhat patronising. It's as if we're saying we trust the people, but not quite entirely. My Lords, that government leaflet spelt out the consequences, and on many occasions during the campaign, those on both sides of the argument made it clear that a vote to leave meant leaving the single market. For example, Mr David Cameron, quote, "The British public would be voting if we leave to leave the EU and leave the single market." Mr George Osborne, "We'd be out of the single market. That's the reality." Mr Michael Gove, "We should be outside the single market." The noble Lord Darling, "Those wanting to leave the EU want to pull Britain out of the single market." My noble friend Lord Hill of Alford, "The Leave campaign has been clear what leave means. It means leaving the single market." And, my Lords, these politicians were quite right to point this out. For if we were to remain in the single market, it would mean complying with the EU's rules and regulations without having a vote on what those rules and regulations are. It would mean accepting a role for the European Court of Justice that would still see it having direct legal authority in our country, and it would mean not having control of our borders. It would, my Lords, to all intents and purposes, mean not leaving the EU at all. The next peculiar argument, is that a second referendum is needed to bring the nation together. And here I agree entirely with the words of the noble Baroness Smith. My Lords, if the argument is that the first referendum divided the nation, a second referendum is hardly likely to unite it. In fact, quite the reverse.